Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Factory Tour. I'm your host, Paul Patterson, and today I'll be talking to my friend, Matt Ward. He's an analyst and ranker with us here at the Factory. He's the lead writer and director of content over at Brodo Fantasy, and he's a professional chef. Let's get him in here. Matt, welcome to the show. How you doing
Ni-
tonight?
Good, man. Nice drop. Yeah. I appreciate the chef shout out as well. I'm doing well, man. I'm really happy and excited to be on here with you today. And second episode, I know I wasn't your first choice, but it's nice to be the second one picked. That's for sure.
Well, Billy kind of forced his way in here for the
Yeah,
first
I
episode.
assumed.
So yeah, I didn't have much say, but I am very excited to have you here. Um, I do have a quick question for you. If you spend your days cooking up delicious meals and you spend your nights cooking up delicious fantasy content, when exactly do you sleep?
I don't very much, and my therapist hates me for it.
Okay, well that's an honest answer, and we appreciate that setting the tone for the show here. But seriously, you do so much, especially in season. I was just like looking back through the content logs, just like three, four, five articles a week just for us, and then you got the stuff over at Brodo. It's pretty wild, um, but I know that you know your stuff, so
Appreciate it,
that is a
man.
good thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm a true workaholic at heart. Like I don't like to have not busy time. I'm always busy, even like on vacations and stuff. I'm always doing something.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. So before we do get into the work and the important stuff for the day, I do want to ask you about something we started talking about a little bit in the Discord. You've got this one dynasty league. We are not just analysts, we are players. We have real leagues, we have league mates, and we do some crazy things in those leagues sometimes. So you've got a league where you actually acquired every single first round pick in the 2023 first round of the rookie
Yeah,
draft. So can you talk me through like how does that
that happened.
happen, and why did that happen, and like what, just tell me about this
So,
league.
I mean, this is one of my oldest leagues, actually. It was an old redraft league that me and my brother started. So, like, my brother is the commissioner of this league. When we first transitioned it into Dynasty, nobody really knew how to value picks, and we didn't have a cap on how far away you could trade out for. We weren't playing on Sleeper at the time. We have since transitioned to Sleeper, which I think is a superior platform for Dynasty. Little free shout out to them. But yeah, so I just started acquiring picks like crazy in 2020. That would the CD Lamb draft year, right? Yeah, 2020.
Yeah.
So in the CD Lamb draft year, I obviously went through some pretty lean years, giving up some superstars for value that I probably shouldn't have, not knowing how to properly value those picks in kind of, I guess it was, yeah, 3 4 years ago. With that said, though, now I have all 12 and kind of just control the league market. Now, obviously, the team has some holes I hope to be able to fill. One of the recent trades I made is I took the last pick of the worst tier, which I feel like is right around the 1-9,
Mhm.
and moved that with some additional assets being Elijah Moore and Jordan Love for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So little moves like this obviously are a part of that, but it was more so just like I'm in a lot of leagues. This was a fun league that had lasted for a long time with guys that I've known for a really long time. And we were first doing Dynasty. So I was like,
Mhm.
what would it look like if I really was just the first guy to have all the picks? And here we are, 2023. I have some pretty solid assets. One of the reasons I brought up CD is I've held him since his rookie year. Transitioned to Josh Allen recently with some upgrades. So, like, we're looking pretty solid moving forward. It's definitely something that I thought was going to backfire the same way that if you try to stack up on positions, that their overall value just starts to depreciate. You try to hold a monopoly on quarterbacks or running backs, people just go for lesser, cheaper value and supplant that with massive value elsewhere. So it doesn't always work that way, like holding all of one asset. But with picks, they really don't depreciate in value. So I control the league market a little bit. Unfortunately, I've kind of forced a monopoly as well, both for and against me, where there's 2 to 4 very top heavy teams that essentially deem their entire roster as untouchable because they have, their top, their starting 10 players are all top 36 assets. So with that said, it's there's some give and take there. There's always going to be some depreciating value, regardless of how you feel about the accruing of draft picks. It's all based on league market specifically, obviously.
That's fascinating to me. It just sounds like a really interesting thing. Like it kind of sounds like you were pulling a little bit of a social experiment here, alongside this just kind of fun strategy you were trying out. It's interesting what you said about the picks not losing any value. I think that's one of the best things about draft picks is just like they always gain value, like no matter what you do. Like they just keep going up. You know, it's like the S&P 500 or gold or whatever. Like you know, you just buy it, you hold it, it gets more valuable.
Always. And
Yeah.
I think that's the common misconception that like picks, how can they accrue value if a 2023 first is worth more? Well, that's exactly the point is you should always view the current draft year as being more value because you can supplant that production rate away.
Mhm.
Meaning, but that also means that 2024, 2025, they're cheaper and they
Yep.
will be the same value as the current pick on the clock at that time. So yeah, they never ever lose value. Um, they do sometimes lose bidding
Right.
value, kind of if you force top heavy teams, and then obviously on the other end you have really shallow teams that can't really afford to buy those picks from you for like
Mhm.
what the hit rate of a rookie in that potential tier could cost. But yeah, they certainly never lose any value as far as what they can bring to your roster.
Yeah, and I think it's a great idea to, not just look at the next year and try to acquire picks, but to look really far out. If you want to try and do what Matt just did, go try to buy all the 2025 first in your league, and then you can kick those into 2026. And then, before you know it, you own the entire Arch Manning draft class. And then you can
Right.
just go from there, you're always going to be able to make these little moves. Like he said, buying Amon St. Brown, he was able to get Josh Allen. I'm sure you'll have that team in a competitive window, either this year or next year. And the other good thing is if you're forced to use those picks, you know what you're doing on the rookie front. You know how to evaluate these guys, and I'm sure you'll know how to kind of wheel and deal them as they gain value in the league, as they make splash plays and hype builds. You know which guys you want to kind of deal and which guys you can hold on to for the long run. So let's talk about
Absolutely.
one of those guys. We've got a little bit of news about this running back. He didn't work out at the combine, didn't work out at his pro day. I'm talking about Sean Tucker from Syracuse. He had some kind of strange medical issue that held him out. We don't exactly know what that is, but he put out his own workout video where he apparently did a 4.33 40-yard dash, 41 and a half inch vertical, 28 reps on the bench. That's really, really impressive. That would give him, I think, a 9.75 relative athletic score, which is like almost perfect. And I'm not accusing Sean Tucker of being a liar, but people are pretty skeptical of those testing numbers.
I
The
am.
I think the biggest issue is that, we don't know how many times he got to do that, right? To get that 40-yard dash
Right.
just right or whatever. So
Exactly.
the good news is for fans of Sean Tucker and fans of good running back prospects in general is that he has been medically cleared and he will be holding a pro day this Monday, April 24th. So we will be able to find out how valid those testing numbers really were. So, how do you feel about this announcement? And have you been a fan of Sean Tucker, the prospect?
Yeah, I think that's one of the guys that you and I kind of both like, above, slightly above consensus potentially. But I really do like Sean Tucker. He doesn't have very many red flags. He looks good on film, and I mean the 40-yard dash is a little suspect, and obviously those Instagram workout numbers are slightly suspect, sure, but at the same time, he has hit over 21 miles per hour on GPS college data. So, like, the kid's fast. We know he's fast. That's part of the reason why we like him. He's a track star. Like, it was runs a 10 2 400 meter, so like he's fast, and that's part of the reason why we like him. He has good production, he has good analytics. The thing I'm worried about with Sean Tucker, and I think we'll touch on it a few times in this episode, is the same thing I'm worried about with all of these running back prospects, and something that I didn't really expect when I was acquiring all these picks in 2020. But the overall running back market is just devalued in general, from every perspective, both in rookie drafts, dynasty markets, and the NFL as well. I think from a contract perspective, Ezekiel Elliott really broke that market, and you'll never again in the history of the NFL see a running back make $90 million. Like, it just won't happen. The level of talent that you can get on insanely cheap deals, both on rookie contracts and after the fact, that is above replacement level is incredible. So what worries me about Sean Tucker the most is I think he's more going to see like day 4 draft capital, or round 4 draft capital rather.
Yeah, that is a really good point. The running back market is so saturated with talent. You just look around, the Vikings potentially going to cut Dalvin Cook. You've got Austin Eckler, who's apparently available for trade. Derrick Henry is available for trade. You've still got guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette bouncing around the free agent market. And you have this massive influx of talent coming into the league. There's just not enough teams. There's not enough jobs for all of these guys to have significant workloads, to have fantasy relevant seasons. And so, we're seeing this subdivision of backfields that continues year after year, where there are just so few workhorses left, and running back production as a whole is becoming more and more replaceable, both in fantasy and in real life. So that is a tricky thing when
Absolutely.
it comes to navigating these prospects. And like you said, fourth round running backs, we'll talk about draft capital in depth in a little bit, but a fourth round running back, no matter how much you like the prospect, there is significant risk there that you're never going to get that kind of a workload to see, a real fantasy payoff.
Exactly. And yeah, you kind of like finished my thought for me. Is I was kind of like thinking if all of these running backs are in the fourth or late third round, then aren't they equal? And it was more so just the path of opportunity, and something that you and I have obviously gone through the weeds on Twitter with is it's just the path to opportunity. And because there are so many good running backs and only so many jobs and only so many touches in a game, a player like Sean Tucker, whose profile definitely has a lot of big play production, so his yards per touch ratings and things of that nature are incredible, to be honest. But that said, it's you still need volume to be able to lead to those explosive plays and that production. It can't just come off of 15 snaps a game.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe just to offer kind of an extreme example of how talent isn't the only factor here. There was an undrafted running back last year by the name of Julius Chestnut that got a little bit of hype in the Twitter streets. He was an unbelievably productive running back at like the most unknown college you've ever heard of, but just absolute workhorse, like insane production, great size, excellent athlete, goes undrafted to the Titans, plays like 4 offensive snaps the whole season. That's just how these things go. Like, it doesn't matter how great you are in college. It does matter, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't always win out is the point. There are other factors, and you need the NFL teams to actually believe in these guys. And the way that we know that is that they're willing to select them early in the draft. You have the
Exactly.
Austin Ecklers that will break through from time to time, but for the most part, the investment from the NFL team just speaks volumes about the volume that these running backs are going to get in the NFL. So that's the problem. We want Tucker to go in the third round. We want a lot of these guys to go earlier in the draft, but there are only so many teams that are going to choose running backs, and that's the problem.
Yeah,
Uh,
and for sure to speak on that just a little bit further and kind of beat a dead horse, so to speak, is there's also equal level prospects to Tucker in that tier. So what's stopping the NFL from continuously like fading it until there's the last equal prospect of that tier and just going, oh, awesome, we got Tank Bigsby in the fourth round. So that's going to be, even for the teams that are
mhm,
interested, it's going to be very difficult to parse out which one of these running backs kind of are
mhm.
safe investments in that mid-second, early second round.
Right. All these NFL teams kind of playing chicken with one another,
Exactly.
waiting for the last viable running back. If they really wanted to wait, I mean, they could get a guy in the seventh round that would probably be serviceable, just because the position is just, it's so situation based, and these guys, move the needle very little, in actuality. But the NFL teams still seem to value the position somewhat. We're still seeing guys like Saquon Barkley and Tony Pollard are getting those franchise tags, and we still see capital being moved for guys like Christian McCaffrey. So there's still value being put into these like high end running backs. It's just whether Tucker or a Tank Bigsby or any of these other kind of middle tier guys can actually establish themselves in that realm. But let's talk
Absolutely.
about those two guys along with a couple other running backs, because we kind of have a tier at the top. Bijan's all alone. We know that he's the 101. And then after that, the consensus is Jahmyr Gibbs, Zach Charbonnet. Those are your next two
Mhm.
guys. Usually Gibbs, then Charbonnet. Some people have it flipped, but that's your big three. Most services are going to tell you that's the big three. That's how you have it on your rookie rankings on Dynasty Football Factory. After that, you've got four running backs back to back to back to back. You've got Tank Bigsby, Zach Evans, Devon Akane, and Sean Tucker, who we just talked about. Those are your RBs 4 through 7. So, what I want to know is, do you see that group as like a single tier, or are there kind of drop offs within that group? How do you see these four guys?
Yeah, absolutely. And in that order, probably as well. The tier might split as like Tank being alone, especially if he gets that early third round draft capital. I would feel absolutely ecstatic with attaching that to his draft profile because of the reasons that I'm willing to ignore some red flags within Bigsby. Obviously, there's nuance attached to that, but I really, really like him as a prospect. Obviously, that true freshman breakout in the SEC is going to help all of that. That said, what would really shake that tier and why I have them back to back to back to back is everything we were just talking about. I need one of them to break through that NFL, draft capital chicken game that these general managers are going to play with such a deep running back class. I need one of them to truly be kind of an NFL GM to say, like, look, this is our guy. He's ahead of this tier, the same way that I feel about him by ranking him slightly ahead of that tier. That, with that said, should all of those guys get day 3 draft capital, I think it's incredibly equal. I think it basically is, you're looking at each one of them for a different reason, potentially have something incredibly positive in their profile that points to extreme upside at the cost of 2-1 to 2-6.
I totally agree with you. I like all four of these guys. I think they all have flaws, right? With Bigsby, like you said, he had that freshman breakout, but he's been pretty inefficient throughout his college career. Didn't hit some of those big production thresholds that some other running backs have hit.
Yep.
There's definitely some situational based factors there, but it is a flag, in the models. With Zach Evans, he was a great recruit coming out. He looks the part, but he never really got that workhorse role. He always had another guy in that backfield splitting work. Devon Akane is pretty simple. He's just really tiny. He's a tiny
Yeah.
guy. He did
Everything
everything
else,
you could ask
check.
for. Yeah, he's just not. He doesn't fit the mold of any like massive hits that we've seen in the NFL. So he's just kind of an outlier in that sense. And then with Sean Tucker, I think he has the cleanest profile of all these guys, but
Agreed.
you have him ranked the lowest. So I'm assuming that it's just these medical concerns and
Mhm.
draft capital concerns with Tucker. We just don't know if he's going to get it. We don't know if the NFL is going to like him as much as maybe we like him looking at the spreadsheets.
Exactly. And with that lowest ranking of Tucker there, it's also because he has the least amount of information
Mm.
after all of these other guys kind of started to round out their models for me, and Tucker was just question mark, question mark, question mark. So with that said, I mean, should his athletic testing hold and that draft capital kind of kick in around that third round, I'd feel pretty good about Sean Tucker, especially at cost.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I have been high on him throughout this whole process. This whole medical thing's been really throwing a wrench into everything. But if the NFL confirms what we already think about him, they draft him relatively early. I'm going to be all in on him as a prospect because he does check as many boxes. He checks more boxes than any of these guys. He has the BMI that you want to see. He is super athletic. It seems. We'll find out on Monday, and his production is excellent. So very high on Sean Tucker, but I could be in on any of these guys as long as the
Yeah,
NFL gives me permission. Another
exactly.
thing, another thing that I like is that all of these guys do seem to have receiving ability,
Mhm.
which is we know a skeleton key to unlock massive fantasy upside. So Zach Evans has kind of the weakest profile of these guys as a pass catcher, and again, that has to do with the fact that he has been splitting work. His best season reception share was just 10%, which isn't terrible. Like it's not like Dwayne McBride or even Kenneth Walker or anything like that. Like that's still a good number. But these other guys, fantastic. We have Tank Bigsby up at 18.8, Tucker at 18.4, a Kane at 19.7. These are like really, really strong numbers that indicate these guys should have that kind of a role in the NFL. And so when you have these guys like Bigsby and Tucker with size and receiving ability, I think those guys have some really tantalizing upside if they can find themselves in a workhorse role.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I think it's kind of one of the overlooked things about Bigsby's profile specifically, because at least Tucker was putting up, what looked to be solid counting stats as well, rather than just, finding market shares. But it was honestly, it's Auburn's offense. There is some nuance there, and coaching changes don't help young budding college athletes usually. But with that said, like Bigsby was very much above average for that team, and probably the only positive outlier that they had on that offense.
Yeah, I think those little bits of context are very much worthwhile when you look at prospects a little bit more closely. I love the spreadsheets and the models for kind of a big picture view, but when we actually get into the minutia of it, there are explanations for these things sometimes.
Absolutely.
And the only thing we don't want to try to kind of pigeonhole. That's the wrong word. We don't want to try to make every running back look good by trying to like rationalize, every flaw that they have. But
Mhm.
in certain instances, it is worthwhile. And I think with Bigsby, because we saw that freshman production, there are reasons to be optimistic about him in spite of what he's done since then. So I'm on board with that. Again, it comes down to the draft capital. So let's talk about that in more detail. Because like we said, we know what we need to know about these guys, but we really can't lock in anything definitively. They're just going to be a big tier until we know where they go in the draft. So you kind of touched on it. You said these rankings are going to change when the draft hits. So explain to me a little bit, why do you expect these rankings to shift so dramatically after the draft? Just kind of, I guess, go over what you just said in a little bit more
Yeah,
detail.
more
Yeah.
detail. Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think one of the easiest ways to explain it is the, it's $1 billion business of missing, right? Like the NFL is as bad of a scout as anybody claims to be a good one, right? But it's $1 billion business. So they're willing to invest real, money and
Mhm.
futures and insane amounts of capital in draft capital as well into these players. So that is them telling you directly as an analyst and somebody that does rookie scouting, look, we're going to give this guy touches. That is their way of telling you, we're going to let this guy hit the football field and show us what he has.
Mhm.
There's obviously some rare outliers to that, as like Jordan Love gets drafted in the first round and hasn't touched a football field until this season. But
Right.
that is also
Allegedly.
an old methodology of developing quarterbacks, because Rodgers sat behind Favre for 3 years as well.
Yeah.
But a little bit of a tangent there. It is the easiest way to round out a model of like, okay, I think Sean Tucker and Tank Bigsby are fairly equal prospects. If I were to create a production model for their first season, it would be this many touches creates this X amount of yards. If Bigsby were to be drafted in the early second round, you may be able to increase that volume a little bit. If Tucker were then drafted in the fifth, you know that Bigsby's path to volume is easier than Tucker's,
Right.
simply based on the capital that is attached to him. So that's why obviously draft capital is going to affect these rankings. As far as quarterbacks are concerned, not so much. We know who the top 3 are and that they're expected to get top 15 draft capital. But with
Right.
running backs, it makes a huge difference. Wide receivers as well. There's a sweet spot to running backs being selected. Obviously, the second round is their first round.
Mhm.
But that third round as well, you start to see guys like Rashad White really round out their profiles with promising draft capital. And I think that's actually a positive example to a team saying, like, look, he might have an equal scouting profile to all of these other guys and that go in the fourth and even a little bit later, but we are investing in him and think he's worth this. So that's why draft capital is going to affect it so much. And I mean, it's very simple, but I think even the most seasoned managers need to be reminded that as much as you like a player, it doesn't matter if they're not getting touches. I
Yeah.
love Garrett Dokes.
Jared Dokes.
But
That's a blast from the past.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Yep. Once he goes, what, sixth, seventh round is where he went. At that point, it's over. You can put him on your taxi squad if you want, if you've got a deep bench, but you can't be counting on anything at that point. It doesn't matter how talented you think he is.
And
And I
even
think,
if they do well, sorry to interrupt, but like even if they do well, they have no job insulation whatsoever because nothing was invested into them.
yeah, I think that's where humility, I think, comes into this game that we play, which is we can think we know whatever we think, and even if it doesn't work out, we can still think like, oh man, if only they gave Jared Dokes a shot. But we have to be humble and just realize like we don't call the shots, and also we don't always know what these teams know because they are with these players personally. They know more about their work ethics, their personalities. There are so many things that we don't have access to that they do. So that's why we just have to defer to them at times. It doesn't mean our rankings have to just be a list of exactly the order that running backs were drafted. It's just, it's always going to be the biggest input because running backs, especially, their touches are given. They're not like a wide receiver just needs to get on the field and they can earn a target. Running backs, they don't even get on the field unless the coach says, go head in there, right? So it's so much harder for them to just earn opportunities on their own. They have to be given opportunities. And the best way for us to know which guys are going to be given opportunities is to go off of the draft capital, like you said. So that's why we have to do it. Just to add some numerical context to everything you just laid out that really bears out the truth of this. I have some hit rates here from my good friend Chris's rookie model. He's an analyst with us over there at the factory. I use his model all the time. Don't worry, I have permission. He has these hit rates for running backs. He has them sorted into different kinds of hits. So he has like elite, good, and then a soft hit. I'm not going to get into the exact criteria, but it's basically like a certain number of points per game over your first 3 seasons. So he has overall hit rates, which means any running backs that got at least to that soft threshold also could have been good or elite. It captures all 3. Anybody that wasn't a pure bust. Round 1 running backs since 2014 have had an 80% hit rate. Round 2, 67%. Round 3, 48%. Rounds 4 and 5, 21%.
You literally just see a linear drop off.
It's just a perfectly linear drop off. And then when we go up, we cut off those soft hits, only the elite and good hits, right? So that means they're hitting, I believe the good hit is like roughly 2 RB2 seasons or better in their first 3 years, something like that. So for round 1, we have a 70% hit rate there. That's really, really strong. That's why we love first round running backs. They're not that common, but they are really, really strong bets. Round 2, that drops all the way down to 33%. In round 3, 24%. But when you get to round 4 and 5, it's just 4%. That's how hard it is for these guys that go on day 3 to hit these elite thresholds. They may give you some like soft, RB3, low end RB2 production in a small sample size. But for them to actually get into that like Aaron Jones range, which is one of those hits on day 3. I think he was a round 5 pick. For them to actually get there, that is so difficult. We're talking about 4%. So they're just not good bets. Once they fall to that range, they're not good bets. And that's why we just have our fingers crossed. Like, please draft Sean Tucker in round 3 and not round 4, because it gets so much riskier.
100%. And that's, you said kind of a buzzword for me too. It's safe bets. Like, again, because it's $1 billion business of missing, we can never be perfect. And there is no such thing as a perfect prospect, but there is such thing as a perfect bet. And that is acquiring a very strong prospect at the right cost.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I love that. It's all about acquisition cost. Like you said, you don't want to overexpose yourself to a risky prospect at a bad price. Right. That's why trading your 2023 first for Dameon Pierce was never going to be a good idea. It just wasn't a good idea. I said it from the beginning. There are still people I think that don't think that that's correct, that they think like, oh no, that was a totally good idea. I mean, let's see what happens in the draft, I guess. They have a lot of picks. The Texans have a lot of picks. They've got picks all over the draft, all over those first 3 rounds. And they could easily land a Jahmyr Gibbs or a Zach Charbonnet or a Sean Tucker.
They have 5 in the top 100.
Exactly. They have tons of shots that they can take. And you could see Dameon Pierce's value just vaporize like that because he was a 4th round pick. There just isn't a big investment. It doesn't matter whether he's like a good running back or not. I think he probably is a good running back, but it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the Texans think. So that's the thing. It's just not making a bad bet.
Funny to that idiom too. Like, not to, go too long on it, but it's like I think they're all good running backs. These guys are in the freaking NFL, man. Like,
That's a
that's
good
the, you know
point.
what, but that's the issue too. That's part and
Mhm.
parcel to the problem is like you can have these positive perceptions that really don't matter if the NFL doesn't agree, if their coaches don't agree, if the schemes don't agree, if the contract isn't right. Like,
Yep. It's very tricky. And it seems, I don't know that the data bears this out. It definitely feels like the NFL is devaluing this position. Well, the numbers bear it out in contracts for sure. I don't know if we've actually seen a shift enough in the draft to notice a trend. It's just such a small sample size. But there are some people that seem to think like the fourth round is like the new third round for running backs
yeah,
because
I mean,
they're all falling later. And, the data doesn't back that up yet. But maybe with a couple more draft classes, maybe we'll start to see fourth round running backs getting the same kind of treatment as third round running backs. I mean, it's certainly a nice thought. I would love to be able to draft fourth round running backs with confidence and think that they were going to get touches. But do you think there's any merit to that idea? Could we see that happening?
I absolutely agree with you. I do think it's going to start being devalued over a larger sample size where we will actually be able to say this definitively. I think a great example to that is the quote unquote beta wide receiver, whereas you didn't see, these 5'11", 180-pound wide receivers get first round draft capital. And over the last 7 years, you've seen 8 of them.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the game changes. It does change over time. We see ups and downs, and right now it looks like running backs are in this downswing where they're being devalued for what I think are valid reasons. Just there's a replaceability at the position, and so the league is adjusting. With that being said, let's just play a little guessing game here. Um, we are going to have the NFL draft here in a few weeks. Well, actually, it's next week. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's soon.
Next week. It's very soon. Um, in the first 3 rounds, like we said, it really drops off after those first 3 rounds. So if you had to guess today, how many running backs do you think we're actually going to see drafted before the end of round three?
I would I am a betting man, so I was going to say if I was a betting man, I'm a betting
Right.
man, I would only be comfortable betting 2.
Two running backs before the
Yep.
end of round three.
Yeah. I would only be comfortable betting 2. And you obviously
Why are you
know
trying to
which
ruin
2.
my day?
Yeah, I mean, that's what but with that perception, I
Mhm.
think it will actually be probably 4 at the very least.
Okay.
I'm not sure which one of Bigsby and Tucker is going to get favored after this pro day, but I think
Mhm.
one of them will sneak into the third and the other one will end up back third, early fourth as like the next running back off the board potentially. I do
Gotcha.
think guys like Kane are going to get incredibly devalued based on size. Say the same about the amazing production of Deuce Vaughn. Um,
Right. Yeah. Deuce Vaughn. He's got no shot, sadly.
yeah, absolutely not. With that said, it's Bijan in the first, I think,
Mhm.
is our only hope at a running back going in the first round. And as much as I love that prospect profile, it is not generational. And we've seen them pass on generational profiles in the first round before, a la Jonathan Taylor. Gibbs should go in the second. I'm
That's kind of a
hoping.
hot take. You just dropped you very casually just dropped kind of a hot take. You just said Bijan he's not a generational prospect?
I mean he's borderline, but I don't
Okay.
actually think he's like true generational is
Mhm.
like he doesn't have an 1,800-yard season with 24 touchdowns, man. I'm just saying
Okay.
he doesn't
Okay.
have one. But with that said, Bijan to me is the closest thing I've ever seen to Christian McCaffrey, and I don't think Christian McCaffrey was seen as a generational talent, obviously
Right.
got drafted very highly in the first round.
Yeah.
But that said, is he is simply better at everything than anybody else. He's
Yeah.
not the best at everything, but he's just better at everything than anyone else is. And
Fair enough.
I think he's our best chance at first round draft capital. I would love to see Bijan fall back into the Chiefs because he's Jamal Charles. I would love to see that. I
Right.
think most likely it's early mid second for Jameer. I don't know that Charbonnet does get second round draft capital
Yeah, it's
or
tough.
third.
It's tough. I mean, I personally, and I know you feel the same way. I mean, I'm hoping as many of these guys as possible can get that day
100%.
one and day two draft capital, not only like for their own personal success, but like just to add some depth to these rookie drafts, right? You want to feel good about the player you're picking at 207, 208. A couple years ago, we were picking Kenny Gainwell at like 210, 211, and he was a fifth round pick. he was a guy that was really expected to go earlier in the draft, and then he fell to day 3. I remember taking him in a bunch of pre-draft best ball drafts, and my teams were just like toast because I had him as like my RB3, RB4 on a bunch of teams, and then he just didn't get the draft capital. I thought he was like a lock because he had such a good production profile. So that's what can happen to these guys. Is there a guy that you think maybe Devon Akane is the guy that's going to fall inexplicably into that late day 3 range?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, absolutely, because especially being an analytic based analyst, he checks all the boxes other than being 5'8" and 173 pounds or whatever it is. So there's just never been a running back in that mold. You said it at the top of the show that the NFL has liked and willing to invest that kind of capital in. We've seen much more productive running backs of this same size as well. Deuce Vaughn is a great example. He's going to go much later. Obviously, Kane has a little bit better athleticism, but guys like Darren Sproles, who literally put up 2,400 combined yards in college, like we've seen the most productive running backs in collegiate history be incredibly undervalued from an NFL perspective simply because of size. I think that will happen with a Kane as well. I also kind of think, and now this is where I was alluding that it might only be 2. I don't think that the NFL is as in on Zach Charbonnet as we are. I think for sure round 3, but a lot of round 2 capital talk with Zach Charbonnet, I don't think that happens.
He's definitely doesn't have the look of like a special player, right? He does a lot of things well. I think he has a great fantasy football skill set, but I don't think he has like a signature trait that's going to jump off the page for teams. So I could see that happening. I hope he goes in the second round. I hope a Kane goes in the second round. He's actually been mocked fairly high. So it'll be a shock to me if he does end up falling into day 3, because it does seem like, the mock drafters seem to think that the teams like him, but it certainly would be an outlier pick. He's certainly an outlier player. It's really, really hard to say where he's going to end up. But let's talk about some potential landing spots for some of these guys. The way you're talking about Bijan, we might actually have some different takes on this. But I have some potential landing spots here for Bijan that I think might be good or interesting. And all of mine, except for one, are in the top half of the first round. Do you think that he's unlikely to go there?
No, I just mean that, like, historically we have seen, and speaking of the devaluing of the running backs, I would not be surprised at all. I have him mocked to the jersey behind you. I think the Eagles got a free top 10 pick and should just take the best prospect available. And regardless of position, I think every scout is in agreement on that as well. Bijan is the best prospect in this class.
Man, I would hate that as an Eagles fan. I would just be very upset.
Genuinely think just because of the way that they got that pick, that it's the easiest decision for them to make, that you get the number 1 rated prospect regardless of position in the draft class. I guess you could argue Jalen Carter, but I think that value has dropped a little bit as of late. Yeah. So, I mean, he is, and most scouts would agree. All the talking heads seem to as well. It seems like a likely scenario with them allowing Sanders to walk, only signing Penny on a 1 year.
Yeah. I mean, it's a popular pick with the mock drafters. I try to have some faith in my boy, Howie Roseman. He seems to pick valuable positions in the first round every year. He tends to go with the O-line and the D-line. I'm trying to put my faith in him. I'm hoping that he won't make that selection. But
incredible defensive prospects there for them as well. With Slay getting a little older, I could see Christian Gonzalez going 10 to the Eagles, but it just seems to line up that it's Bijan to the Eagles.
I will be very upset, more upset than I've been at any draft pick since, ironically, the Jalen Hurts draft pick. So I was very, very angry when we drafted Jalen Hurts. So clearly I don't know anything and I should just shut my mouth. I thought Carson Wentz was our franchise quarterback and that was a wasted pick when we needed to get him some weapons, but they knew what was going on. So if they take Bijan, what do I know? Maybe it's a great pick. I actually don't think it's the best landing spot for Bijan, to be honest with you, because first of all, we have a rushing quarterback who loves to tuck and run near the goal line. He has scored tons of rushing touchdowns over his career. And he also doesn't target running backs, as mobile quarterbacks don't. But the Eagles were dead last in targets to running backs last season. Yeah. And they didn't have terrible
Miles
talent.
Sanders after a 70 target rookie season.
Yeah, exactly. It's not where you're gonna see Bijan's ceiling unlocked. Like he could have like a 20 touchdown season, but he's not gonna get like 100 targets, which he could absolutely do in the right situation. So I'm hoping it's not the Eagles. I definitely think the Falcons at 8 are totally live to pick Bijan. It just seems like the kind of thing that they would do. It would be a terrible decision where a franchise is at, they're gonna have a quarterback available to them most likely, but they could do it.
Yeah, I mean, Falcons absolutely could do anything stupid.
Sorry, Falcons fans, if you're in
It's
the
true.
audience, don't leave us. The Texans at 12 could do it. That would totally vaporize Damian Pierce. Um, the Pats at 14, the Commanders at 16, the Bucks at 19. All these teams have been mocked to grab Bijan. Even the Titans at 11, they could grab their heir to Derrick Henry. Maybe he would get the Derrick Henry treatment, and he wouldn't get any run as a rookie, and Derrick Henry would have the DeMarco Murray year, and that would be hilarious.
I
Poetic
would hate it.
justice there, but we would hate it for our fantasy teams. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know which of these teams which would be the best fantasy landing spot. He's going to be great no matter where he goes.
I think my favorite, honestly, landing spot, especially with a bit of the trade acquisition rumors popping up, how they've utilized him recently. Obviously, their offensive coordinator, former New Orleans offensive
Uh,
coordinator, who unlocked Alvin Kamara. Yeah, I would love Bijan to the Chargers. And I think that also gives them exactly what they needed that they didn't have in the playoffs. And that's somebody that can get 2.5 yards between the tackles.
yeah, that would be an excellent fit. Where do the Chargers pick? I don't
I think they're
actually have that in
20,
front of us. 20
20,
something.
yeah,
They were in the
20th
playoffs,
even?
so
Yeah.
yeah. So it would be a bit of a fall for Bijan based on where he's mocked, but it could certainly happen. I think these mock drafters, they tend to push the skill position guys up a little bit, and I don't have any data to support that. It just seems like they do. I saw a mock draft today with Jonathan Mingo in the first round, so like I don't know what that's about, but they're pushing these guys up, so we could see him fall. And
Panthers love Mingo.
I think he went to the Saints actually in this mock,
Oh,
so that would be a weird.
I
They
hate my
traded
team.
up. Yeah, that was a weird one, but we could see him fall there. That would be absolutely electric, pun intended, if you went to the Chargers. What about Jahmyr Gibbs? I don't know if you're as high on Jahmyr Gibbs as me because I'm looking at your rankings and you have him behind Jackson Smith and Jigba. I
I
actually
do.
have him. I actually have him if he gets the top 40 draft capital that I'm expecting. I have him ahead of JSN.
So with that said, I do have him in the top 40 as well, but I also have JSN in the top 15, and I
Mhm.
think that kind of equals out like that.
Right.
The red flags on JSN's profile come from obviously being underutilized as a freshman when he has. I mean, you could argue there were like 4 Hall of Fame wide receivers on that team when he
Yeah,
was a freshman,
unbelievable. Yep.
right? So, and certainly at the very minimum, 5 first round wide receivers. So with that said, I think JSN's profile that sophomore season should top 15 draft capital be attached to that. He's about as safe as a bet as you can get past quarterback insulated value, because regardless of how quarterbacks perform, if they get selected in the top 10, they have insulated value beyond their rookie season that is just untouchable in fantasy. Jahmyr in the top 40, which I do have him mocked, I just behind JSN. I think he can get that first round capital, but that's also needs to be the perfect landing spot, so to speak. So it would have to be the Chiefs or the
Yeah.
Bengals. Like that's
This
really the only, yeah.
I would love him on the Bengals. That's my number one spot for him. The Bengals were seventh in running back target percentage last year, and they were throwing to backs that are nowhere near the receiving talent of Jahmyr Gibbs. You'd have this incredibly stacked offense. It would be fantastic for his value because he would just get peppered with targets. He'd be in scoring position. That would be excellent. Not to turn this into a JSN versus Gibbs pod, but I just want to throw
Do
one
it.
thing at you. This is my argument. This is the simple version of the argument. Let's look at last season, right? Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. Well, Garrett Wilson's risen in mock drafts, or in startup drafts. But let's say Drake London, Chris Olave were much more impressive as rookie wide receivers than Kenneth Walker was as a rookie running back. And yet, Kenneth Walker is going ahead of those guys in startup drafts now. I think there's so much safety with these rookie running backs to get high draft capital because there's so much thirst at the position and there is like no youth. There's like no young players that are guaranteed volume. So when one of those guys comes in, they just like, as long as they do anything, they accrue value in the next season. So that's kind of where I'm looking at it, just like a market thing. I think JSN would have to do more as a rookie to outpace Gibbs going into year 2. So they're really, really, really close, but that's just how I look at it.
I really love that perspective, actually. And I mean, there is perceivable data to back that up. You can look at historical ADP and guys that have top, 40 draft capital as running backs, and where their value goes the next year. And it seems pretty stable regardless of production. You can even talk about guys like J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, who were injured, didn't play. Javonte Williams, who only had 120 touches, still maintained more than 90% of their initial startup value.
Exactly. So I just see them as very safe investments. And it's like we said with those hit rates, right? They get drafted high, they get volume, and they get a little bit of job security. They get a couple years where they're going to be the guy. So I'm hoping Gibbs can fall into that situation. He has unbelievable receiving upside. So I'm hoping if he can land in on the Bengals, I would love him on the Chiefs too. He could be like fancy Jerick McKinnon.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why it was my ideal landing spot, is those
Yeah.
final 5 weeks of Jerick McKinnon in fantasy football, literally the RB1 overall. I
Yep.
mean, put a supercharged Jerick McKinnon there. And I kind of want to drive home that point of incredible receiving upside. Jahmyr Gibbs has as good of, or if not like literally the best receiving profile of any running back I've ever seen come out of college. He's run over 25% of his total routes have come from the wide receiver position.
Yeah.
He
could be wide
special
receiver.
pass catcher.
He could play wide receiver and he would
100%.
like be really good at it. Yeah,
Yeah.
He's insane. I don't think people fully appreciate what he brings to the table. But hopefully the NFL does. That's what I'm hoping. So we think he's going to go top 40. I thought of a fun landing spot. The Texans at 33. What if they take Bryce Young at 2 and then they pair him with his college teammate as like a pass game complement for Dameon Pierce?
I think that's an excellent landing spot. I think he very well could logically fall there, and that also gives the Titans that additional pick to boost the O-line or defense, which they obviously need to do.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun one. And I do kind of want to see the Dameon Pierce hive get their due. I have nothing against Dameon Pierce, the player. I just don't think they should be able to get away with this. That's all I'm saying.
I completely agree.
Are there any other good spots that you see in those first 3 rounds where, fingers crossed, we could see a running back land there?
Yeah, I think obviously Texans are a hot spot just because of all the positional needs. If they bring in a rookie quarterback, you're probably looking at check down city as well. Something that I think, the data does back, but we didn't really talk about it, is rookie quarterbacks have very low ADOTs, and usually those targets are going to tight ends and running backs. I think, again, the Chargers, because we're just going to fit him into that Austin Eckler spot. New Orleans has Jamal Williams. I really think Alvin Kamara's days are numbered and over. Now, we don't have a first round pick, unfortunately.
Man, what a bummer.
Which
team has that pick?
Second. Yeah, yeah. Howie Roseman's incredibly manipulative, I think. Although a little sidebar tangent, he was on the Kelsey podcast, essentially being like, "Look, they have to say yes." Like,
right.
He's like, I'm not doing any voodoo magic here. Everybody has to agree to what but I honestly do genuinely think, especially just with the way that New Orleans has traditionally run all of their passing attacks as a lower ADOT, that Jahmyr Gibbs would be an incredible replacement for Alvin Kamara and complement to Jamal Williams, a la DeAndre Swift. Those are probably my top favorite fan landing spots. Yeah. For fantasy, it's genuinely high-powered offenses. The Bengals are the best possible spot, probably Kansas City behind that. I do think teams I don't know. It's tough to say that you want to see him go to Philly or another high-powered offense that kind of doesn't utilize running backs, but he's just such a good fit for teams that utilize different functionality at different positions.
Yeah.
With that said, like a Shanahan-esque offense. How did I not? How about Shanahan's offense, but in Miami?
Oh yeah, Miami is an excellent spot. I think if any of these running backs goes to Miami in the first 3 rounds, I think that guy's going to get a whole lot of hype, no matter who it is. I'm really hoping it's somebody, one of these guys we like, whether it's a Kane, Bigsby, Tucker. One of those guys goes to the Dolphins. They have the 51st pick. That would be beautiful. I believe they have their 3rd round pick as well.
My heart.
So if one of those guys goes there, there's just so much opportunity. Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. they've been fine as veteran running backs. They are not preventing any young talent from coming in and just
Absolutely.
sweeping that right out from under their feet. So that's one of my favorite spots. And then I like the Cardinals as a landing spot for a running back. They have James Conner there and basically nothing else. We know James Conner is over the hill. He's washed. He scores fantasy points because they give him touches, but he's really not in a different position than Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt. It's just that he's employed at the moment. But that could change very quickly. He could be relegated to a backup role if someone like Charbonnet lands there, or Jahmyr Gibbs if he goes there in the early second. So there are spots for these rookie running backs. It's just that they're not all going to get a spot. So we can sit here and we can drool over the spots, but in the end, one of these guys is going to end up like on the Lions or behind Saquon Barkley on the Giants, and everybody's going to be scratching their heads like, how did this happen? How did we let this happen? How did we let them ruin this prospect? But it's going to happen to somebody because it doesn't go the way that we draw it up ever.
100%. And I mean, like, there really are only, if you really break it down, there's probably only like 9 to 10 starting running back positions available right now, and there's certainly more than 10 running back prospects I like.
Exactly. It's tough, and they're not all going to land on those 10 spots because there are teams that want depth, and they're going to grab these guys and they're going to hold them on the depth chart and give them a few touches a game, and we're all going to weep at their demise. The Vikings are another spot. If Dalvin Cook gets cut, I really don't think they're going to just hand the reins over to Alexander Mattison.
I wish they would. I got
Nah.
so much Mattison as like handcuffed, and obviously he was a free agent this season. I felt if somebody was ever going to pay him, he would get decent enough touches. That just seems like a pipe dream at this point.
Right. I mean, he could handle the work. I don't think he's a supremely talented back. He's honestly, he's not that different from Zach Charbonnet, in my opinion. Kind of the same deal, like kind of a jack of all trades.
One of like my most confident comps for Charbonnet actually turned out to be Madison, which was
well, there you go.
He was a good prospect. It wasn't a bad comp.
Yeah, great minds think alike. He went in the third round, so there's hope. There is hope. All right, well, we are going a little long here, but I did want to talk a little bit about your team, the New Orleans Saints. So let's just rapid fire here.
I was trying to allude to it, yeah.
Right. So obviously, they won't be drafting Bijan Robinson because my Eagles stole their first round pick. So my first question is, have you mentally recovered from that?
Yeah, I think now I have. I think 1,000 yards in 15 games helped me recover from that a little bit.
Right. We obviously love Chris Olave.
Yes, we did, and we do. And if they were going to pay up for a receiver after Wilson went off the board, I would have quite literally probably switched jerseys if it was anybody but Olave. In hindsight too, though, like I was not happy about that pick at all. I was very vocal about it on the social medias of like, as soon as that trade went through, because if you remember, it actually went through before the draft. I was like, that's not for a quarterback. Like there's no quarterback that they're willing to spend this draft capital on in this position. I knew it wasn't for a quarterback.
People were trying to push that in there. They were like, oh, they really like Matt Corral. And it's like, no, that's not what's going to happen.
No. So knowing that immediately, I was like, dude, that is 2 firsts and a future undisclosed second, I think, or protected second for a receiver. Like I knew we were going to go get, it was Wilson or Olave, whoever fell probably was my perception of it. I really wanted Trevor Penning, but I was like, we have 19th, and that's who they took at 19. So it was, I have mentally recovered. I love Chris Olave, but the issue that I perceive with Olave as a Saints fan is what's ever going to keep him around. Like they bought him out so many times that they finally get a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, they have a franchise quarterback. They signed Derek Carr this offseason. Aren't you watching the news? You're not a fan of the Derek Carr decision?
It's an upgrade. I think you can't deny that it's not an upgrade over Dalton and Jameis. It is certainly an upgrade. Derek Carr has probably produced at an above average level for longer than both of them, but it is still just above average. It's certainly not franchise altering. And I think New Orleans also knows that. Mickey Loomis is the best cap manager of all the general managers in the NFL. And it's not like the cap isn't fake. It's just that you have 32 of the greatest contract lawyers in the history of the world at any given time working for the NFL. But with that said, Mickey Loomis obviously can manipulate cap. So the Derek Carr signing doesn't worry me so much for the money invested. It worries me for the time invested, where speaking to that Olave is like, you just spent 2.5 first-round picks on a rookie wide receiver that by the time you go to re-sign and pick up that 5th-year option and he's not like, there's nothing keeping him around. There's no franchise quarterback. The mentors will be gone. It's a new coaching staff, or potentially an even newer one by that point. Like, so the investment for future purposes just seems so backwards to me.
Yeah, the path forward for the Saints isn't clear. It's like, you're going to have Carr, you're going to win some games, you're in a terrible division. You're probably not going to seriously compete for a Super Bowl, but you're not going to find yourself in position for a franchise quarterback. It's just one of those things where like everybody wants to keep their job, but there's not, like, from an outside observer's perspective, it just doesn't seem optimal if your goal is like winning championships.
Yeah, at any given time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But let's talk about the fantasy assets. First of all, Olave. I think Chris Olave, and you would agree, is undervalued still in Dynasty. People don't seem to realize just how incredible he was as a rookie. So I just want to throw out 2 stats. Both of these stats, incredibly, contain the same 5 wide receivers. The other 4 wide receivers, one of them being Chris Olave, the other 4 are Odell Beckham Jr., AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. It's pretty good company. We have top 5 yards per route run for all rookie wide receivers since 2011. That's Beckham, Brown, Jefferson, Chase, Olave. We also have a stat, only 5 rookies ever have hit 2.25 yards per team pass attempt with a 22% target share or higher. That goes Jefferson, Chase, Beckham, Brown, Olave. So it's the same 5 guys. He is in fantastic company. You need to go out and get this guy. I don't know why Garrett Wilson is substantially more expensive when Olave arguably had the better rookie season. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's really, really arbitrary. I think Garrett Wilson just made more splashy plays. People like the yards after catchability, but it's in a big market. But Olave is excellent. So if you can go take your Garrett Wilson, you go trade down to Olave and get literally anything on top. You need to go get that done right away. Same goes for Drake London. He doesn't play for the Saints, so we won't talk about Drake London, but same deal. He was also excellent as a rookie. These 3 guys were insane. I think they all kind of overshadowed each other a little bit because there wasn't like one guy. And also they played on bad offenses. And so, their rate numbers are a lot better than their actual counting stats, but they did everything that we could ask them to do as rookies. And all 3 of them, I think, are going to be fantastic.
I think you made an excellent point there by saying that all 3 of them played on bad offenses, because people are almost discounting Olave, or I mean, rather increasing Wilson's value because he played on a bad offense, when you're ignoring the fact that Olave had Dalton and Jameis Winston throwing to him.
Yeah, that was a terrible situation as well. Not like some massive difference. It's not like Olave put up those numbers with Joe Burrow while Garrett Wilson was playing with Zach Wilson. It was rough for all these guys. But they're all going to be stars. And really, we're just waiting on the situation to sort itself out. While Derek Carr might not be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback, he certainly can support wide receiver production. He's supported multiple wide receiver ones throughout his career. He just did it last year with Devontae Adams. He's done it with Amari Cooper. Michael Crabtree got close if he wasn't ever a wide receiver
Hunter
one.
Renfrow, bro.
Hunter Renfrow had a wide receiver 1 season. I don't know if Olave is quite on that talent level, but certainly Carr can get it done in the passing game. So that's good for him. It might also be good for Michael Thomas, who's apparently coming back to the Saints. We'll see if he can play more than like 3 or 4 games in a season.
Never been anything but a wide receiver 1.
Is he worth a dart throw? Is he worth picking up?
100%.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I looked up his ADP on the Bulletproof website, their startup ADP from this past month. It says that Michael Thomas is going in the 13th round as the wide receiver 52.
Yep. Make that investment 100%. Even, dude, if it's 4-3 games, it's well worth it.
Now, Matt, are you sure that you want to pass over the likes of Alec Pierce, Donovan Peoples-Jones, John Mechie to get Michael Thomas? Are you sure? Because these guys are significantly younger. They might not actually be any good at earning targets or scoring fantasy points, but they are much younger. So do you really want to make
perils
that
of dynasty drafts, I guess? Man, absolutely. Like, he's a very hard player to even put productions on future, or rather put like assume what his points totals are going to be, because like the lowest Michael Thomas has ever had in any game is, or points per game season, is like 17.1 points per game. If you just remove, 6 game played threshold or 8 game play,
Right,
like
right.
he is a top 5, 6 wide receiver literally every single time he's on the field. It's really difficult with Olave in town too. I think that target share, those attempts are definitely going to go towards the younger guy that they're developing. That said, at that cost, like even if it is an injury riddled season and you can, because the benefit of Michael Thomas, in all honesty, is that if he's healthy, you start him. If he's not, you have to put him on the bench. It's pretty easy to figure out. If he's in the game, you're going to play him.
Yeah, totally agree. You got to go out and make that investment at that price. And in the target share doesn't really concern me because you're looking at the rest of that team and there's just not anybody else that commands targets. I'm not really worried about Jawan Johnson. I don't know who's their wide receiver 3. Is Traquan
Rashid
Smith
Shaheed?
still around? Yeah, he's got a little bit of hype going, but I don't think you need to worry about him as anything more than like a situational deep threat kind of guy. Alvin Kamara is probably going to get suspended, so he's going to miss some time. Like, who else are the targets going to go to? If it's Olave and Thomas, as long as they're on the field, they're going to command massive target shares. It could be kind of like what you saw with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith last year, what you saw with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We can see dual wide receivers get these big target shares, and Carr is going to attempt enough passes, probably, I would assume, to support both those guys. So if Thomas is on the field, you can start him. He's very, very attainable. I would say go send out an offer in your league right now. A little more than a 3rd-round pick might get it done. So seriously, go make that trade. Kamara, you kind of touched on. You said you're pretty much done with him as a dynasty asset. I agree. He showed signs of decline already last year. He's got this huge criminal thing hanging over him. He's probably going to miss games. He's going to be like 28 during the season or after the season. It's just rough seeing with Kamara. He had some great years, but he's coming out towards the end here, and there are just other veteran running backs I'd rather buy with fewer red flags.
Yep. And I mean, I do understand the process of wanting to hold a little bit for some in-season or again, some boost in production when he's actually back on a field. Like, I get that. The return's not going to be great, but I'm almost willing to just eat that value return and take whatever I can get so I don't have to risk even less value.
Yeah, he's not going to see a massive value rebound, even if he does provide a little bit of production for you during this season. So sometimes it's worthwhile to just sell low before it goes to 0. And that's what you can do here. You can pivot him into some other kind of young running back, maybe like a Tyler Algier type, somebody who
that would be a great trade, actually.
Maybe has a little bit of upside, somebody who's younger, who's going to have more resale ability during the season if they can put together some production. So, don't hold on to the past years. We have to look ahead at what's going to happen. And I think with Kamara,
always be building.
Always be building. Great. Well, that's a great place to cut us off here. We've gone over an hour here on the factory tour. It's been great talking to you, Matt.
So much fun, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys need to go and check out dynastyfootballfactory.com. You need to get the annual membership because that means you get to join the Discord. That means you get to talk to me and you get to talk to Matt. You get to ask him even more questions about his league where he has all the 1st-round picks. It's great. We also have a rookie draft guide coming out soon. It's like 80 pages long. It's going to be awesome content. So you guys need to get over there. Matt, what do you have coming up for the people that they can expect from you?
I mean, you can find me on Twitter at PsychWardFF. You can find all of my content archived at Dynasty Football Factory, at DFF Fantasy on Twitter. Always going to be producing video content. I hope to come on this one again soon and kick it with you.
For sure.
Yeah, man, hitting up the pods, trying to get on TikTok a little too, but I'm a nervous Nelly.
That sounds great. I'll do a TikTok with you as well. I've never made one before, but I'll happily dip my toe in those waters with you. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. This has been the Factory Tour, and I'll see you next week.